Well, here we are in Module 8, the final module, both of Living Epic and of Gaming Homer. And this is the module called Community and Polis. And what this module is about is the way that Homeric epic was a source of an incredible energy for the creation of something that was new when Homeric epic was becoming old. And when it was kind of reaching its culmination, and that was the thing that we generally know in English as the city-state, or in Greek, the polis. That is this region with a town at its center, which would become the foundation of the modern nation-state eventually. In fact, what we have here in the United States and elsewhere in what are generally called the Western democracies, all of that comes originally out of this thing, this new social organization called the polis. And the polis really, and this is something that people tend to overlook because they're not used to thinking in literary terms about how political organizations come into being, the polis owes a heck of a lot to Homeric epic. And in the epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, we see it beginning to form, and we can also see how that formation is coming out of a dynamic that has to do with heroism and the specific kind of heroic storytelling that we find the bards doing. That is, we can actually draw a line from the bards to the polis and from the polis to us. Now, what the implications of that would be for adventure video games and community building in our own world are the kind of thing we have to explore down the line. I'm going to start out with this segment and with the next segment talking about the community and the building towards the polis that we see in the Iliad and the Odyssey. In this segment, I'll be talking about the primary material of Iliad 23 and Odyssey 2, and then in the next segment, I'll be talking about Naj's take on that in the Best of the Achaeans. We'll move from there in segments 3 and 4 to talk about what that has to do with gaming. In segment 3, we'll look at specific moments within games that refer outward towards a kind of community building and provide an impetus towards community building within the content of the game. And then in segment 4, we'll look at how that actually is working within such things as internet forums, both the official forums and, I think for this purpose more importantly, unofficial forums, communities of gamers who have come together around their gaming pastime and their own gaming culture and are forming in dialogue with the games that they play a new kind of community. Now, it's a new kind of community, and at the same time it's building on existing kinds of communities. That is, it's continuous, I'm going to try to say, with the various communities that we're part of in our own quote-unquote real lives. Things like school communities, town communities, church communities. All of these things I'm going to suggest are continuous and constructively continuous with the kinds of community that are coming together around games. Book 23 of the Iliad is about the funeral of Patroclus and about his funeral games, which come after the funeral and are a kind of celebration of having buried him. And what I'm going to suggest is that in the intense attention that the bards of Book 23 paid to the funeral and to the games that followed, we see the impetus in what is called hero cult towards the formation of the polis. One thing we know archaeologically about the early polis is that it was very strongly organized around religious cult, and the religious cult in particular of the heroes. Now, you can tell that there is a kind of interface between the storytelling of the Homeric bards and this thing called hero cult. The easiest thing to compare it to is the cult of the saints, although that comparison isn't quite as explanatory as we'd like it to be. But if you think of the way that a lot of cultures worship dead human beings who are thought to have been special in one way or another, whether they're ancestors or whether they're heroes, that's the kind of thing we're talking about with hero cult, and that forms a separate and distinct religion from the Olympian religion that we find in the worship of gods like Zeus, Hera, and Athena. Hero cult was its own thing, and it was based around certain cult centers that would almost certainly have been centers of Mycenaean culture, the culture that had collapsed around 1200 BCE, which had left enormous palaces, or at least enormous in the eyes of the Greeks as they were around 800 BCE, had left these enormous palaces behind, which are then mythologized within cult as being the tombs of heroes. And so when in Book 23 we have a description of the making of one of those tombs, the tomb of Patroclus, what we have is a sort of beginning of hero cult and a way of looking at what it meant to practice that kind of hero cult. The final thing to add in there is that the rituals of hero cult itself are patterned after funeral rituals. And so a funeral for an actual person is a sort of echo, and vice versa, a hero cult ritual is an echo of the actual funeral that one might have seen for a loved one. So here's the end of the funeral proper of Patroclus from Book 23 of the Iliad. We're starting at line 232. But now they who were with the son of Atreus assembled together, and the sound and murmur of their oncoming wakened Achilles, who straightened himself and sat upright and spoke a word to him. Son of Atreus, and you other greatest of all the Achaeans, first put out with gleaming wine the pyre that is burning, all that still has on it the fury of fire, and afterwards we shall gather up the bones of Patroclus, the son of Menoetius, which we shall easily tell apart, since they are conspicuous where he lay in the middle of the pyre, and the others far from him at the edge burned, the men indiscriminately with the horses. And let us lay his bones in a golden jar and a double fold of fat, until I myself enfold him in Hades. And I would have you build a grave mound, which is not very great, but such as will be fitting for now. Afterwards the Achaeans can make it broad and high, such of you Achaeans as may be left to survive me here by the benched ships, after I am gone. So he spoke, and they did as swift-footed Peleon told them. Peleon is another way of saying son of Peleus. First with gleaming wine they put out the pyre that was burning as much as was still aflame, and the ashes dropped deep from it. Then they gathered up the white bones of their gentle companion, weeping, and put them into a golden jar with a double fold of fat, and laid it away in his shelter, and covered it with a thin veil. Then laid out the tomb, and cast down the holding walls around the funeral pyre. Then heaped the loose earth over them, and piled the tomb, and turned to go away. But Achilles held the people there, and made them sit down in a wide assembly, and brought prizes for games out of his ships, cauldrons and tripods, and horses and mules, and the powerful high heads of cattle, and fair girdled women, and grey iron. First of all he set forth the glorious prizes for speed of foot for the horsemen. And it goes on like that. And we then have the wonderful story of these funeral games, who won and who lost, and of course everybody gets a prize. This is the generosity of Achilles. This is Achilles apportioning his wealth in a way that Agamemnon didn't in the first book, and this is showing Achilles to be the superior community builder. And it's kind of proposing a model of community based around the tomb of Patroclus. That is, hero cult leads to a new kind of community, a kind of community where warriors work together. That is, the polis, as it's coming to be around 800 BCE, not only around hero cult, but also, and here's another very important strain in the growth of the polis, around a new warrior class, the hoplite, the one with the big shield and the long spear and the greaves and the helmet. This is the new middle class of the Greek city, the people who can afford this armor and can afford to fight this way. And there's a little bit of evidence in the Iliad of the beginning of the hoplite technique, the phalanx, all of those shields together, all of the spears bristling out. Just a hint that as the Iliad is being put in its final form, hoplite fighting is coming into being, and between hero cult and hoplite fighting, you have the foundation of this new thing, the polis. And then beyond that, of course, our own politics, a word that comes from polis.